What's up, guys? Welcome back to Bible Fun with Dunns. Today we're in Titus chapter 1. Let's get started.
Okay, so Titus chapter number 1 obviously is us being able to start a new book. Now, the books we're about to kind of get into, if you looked at 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, and Titus, these are part of a collection of letters in the Bible called the pastoral letters. Because what's happening in these letters is that Paul is getting older in life, and he's writing to two young pastors that he's mentored. One is named Timothy, and the other's name is Titus. And he's telling them how to do their ministry in a way where Paul knows he's probably about to die and go to heaven. And he's got some words he wants to give to these guys. Now, what's interesting is that Paul, in all of his missionary journeys, he leaves Timothy at Ephesus, but he leaves Titus in a place called Crete. It's an island. And so when Paul leaves him there, Titus stays there for a really long time. As a matter of fact, church history says that Titus lived in Crete until well into his 90s. I mean, he was there a long time. Most of all of these letters are going to deal with things like what is the gospel, because that's at the center of everything. It's going to deal with basic Christian life. How should we live? How should we serve God? It's also going to talk about the structure of the church. How should a church function? What should a church do? Now, it's been said throughout the years that a church really has 5 functions. It worships, it fellowships, it does missions, it disciples, and it evangelizes, and it does ministry. So the church has certain functions. Paul is coming from it, understanding that this idea of the church is still very new, and he's kind of giving some practical keys into how do you set up a church. Now, this kind of does get us into a little bit of a problem, though, because just a minute ago, Jackson and I were looking back over this passage, and so he went to read chapter number 1. He comes back and he goes, I don't know what my takeaway is from this passage. And I thought, well, that's odd. So I started looking at the passage again, and here's what it's talking about. The qualifications for those who lead the church. It calls them here elders. This is a word that in church, these are like the leaders of the church. These are like the church staff. It's like the church pastor and those who help kind of run the daily activities of the church. And I think when Jax read it, he said, well, I'm not that, so this doesn't really apply to me. But what we talked about, I think, was helpful, right?
Right.
That at our church, we have this saying that we say every once in a while, that every member is a minister and every member is a missionary. So just because Jax isn't the pastor of the church we go to, could it be that God makes us the pastor of somewhere in our lives? For instance, the question is not, does God send us? The question is, where has God sent us? So I may be the pastor of a church, and people may easily be able to see that because I'm on stage on Sundays. Well, Jax may be one of the only believers in a class at school, or in a neighborhood full of kids. Who knows? Just wherever you put yourself in those shoes, he's putting himself there. So we all have a form of leadership. And I think what this is doing is this is saying if we're going to have influence for Jesus, then we better live our lives at a high standard of submission to God and loyalty. So, Jax, what did you get from this?
All right, so it's obvious that most of us aren't pastors. Well, pastors with that title, but all of us are pastors within a different place in our lives. So this lists a bunch of qualities that these pastors need to have. And so while most of us can't really have them as our job being a pastor, we can have them in our places in life where we need to pastor to other people. So it says that we need to be hospitable, and we need to love what is good. We need to be sensible, righteous, holy, and self-controlled. So we need to hold ourselves at these high standards in order to evangelize to other people.
I agree. I think when you look at this list, if we're looking at from just that every member is a minister, every member is a missionary, and we look at it that, like Jack said, it may not be your job, but it is still your mission. We can then see that this isn't criteria. This isn't a list about their performance. This is a list about our character. All of our character. You know, what I think is interesting, like in verse 16 of this passage, it says, "For they profess to know God, but in their works they deny him." So they're saying the right thing, but they're not living the right thing. Recently on a Sunday morning, I quoted to you the words of an old Puritan named Richard Baxter. He said, "Take heed to yourselves, lest your example contradict your doctrine. Lest you unsay with your life what you say with your tongue, and the greatest hinderer of your success for the Lord be your own labor." So in this case, we can be our own worst enemies, not by what we say. We can say the right things. It's in what we do. I also like this idea. Now, this is incredibly important for me to get. So in verse number 5, he says, "For this reason I left you in Crete, that you should set in order the things that are lacking," which means this: everybody's got a job. Let's put all the pieces together. He says, "And appoint elders in every city as I've commanded you." Well, who are these elders? It's the next generation of leaders. I have a kind of a sobering thought that I think oftentimes, and I apply it to myself, but I think we can all apply it. A pastor needs to know that every pastor is just an interim pastor. It doesn't matter if any one pastor stays 100 years at their church. Not going to happen, by the way. You get old at that point. But listen, you're just there until the next guy gets there. Jax is just in that class until next year. You're just in your neighborhood or your group or your team or whatever it is for a short period of time. We are all temporary. So in our temporary, we need to be thinking how we can make eternal investments in those places. But here's another thing. If this is about leaders who serve God, then at the end of the day, what this is really pointing to is the fact that all leaders, if given everything else a leader is responsible for, the number one priority is this. You ready? You got to walk with God. You have to walk with God. You can't ever pour out what's not already inside of you. You can never lead somewhere you hadn't gone. So as you and I serve as leaders, wherever it is God's put us, in our families, at our homes, in our church, in our Sunday school class, in our classes, on our teams, whatever and wherever it is God puts you, you have to walk with God. So listen, whatever you do this week, make sure you walk with Jesus. That'll set us up to not only say the right things, but to back it up with our lifestyle. We want to love Jesus. We want to do everything for him. You keep reading, but more than even reading, as we're reading, let's do this, but let's do something more. Let's apply what we're reading to our lives and make a difference for Jesus. Have a great day. Keep reading. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye.